Will be my second presentation in the morning. Again, I'm Steven Urakawa, project manager with Mid-Columbia Fisheries. This is a planting project, reforestation project along the Teanaway River that's going through the Riparian SRFB grant round. We're still up in the Teanaway. By we're downstream from Cat's project. In the West Fork, we're going to be along the main stem Teanaway here. So the main stem Teanaway is primarily in private ownership. It's been recently developed for agricultural use and single family residences. It's a pretty common vacation place. Recreation higher up in the watershed tends to be pretty heavy in the summer. But again, access through the main stem is constricted by private ownership. So the Teanaway, as Kat briefly touched on, is limited by temperature and low summer flow and poor water quality, but it sports a disproportionate number of steelhead, Mid-Columbia steelhead that return and spawn. About a third of all upper river steelhead go through the main stem Teanaway to spawn up in tributaries. Spring Chinook salmon have also been documented to spawn in the main stem Teanaway and rear in the main stem Teanaway, along with resident rainbow and cutthroat trout. This planting project will address particularly temperature and our water quality issues by restoring our floodplain and riparian areas. So this planting project is along the Teanaway River at River Mile 5. It's on river left. Adjacent to this sort of developing riparian bar, but this riparian area is constricted by agriculture. Just zooming in here for more of a close-up of the main stem Teanaway outside of Cleellum, just upstream of River Mile 5. Our goals with this project are enhancing floodplain function, really. So this is an agricultural field. It's an active agriculture. It's currently a Timothy production that we'd be looking at installing on 2.43 acres, about 1,800 plants. These plants will help improve water quality by capturing sediment and shading the stream over time. This project addresses these in sort of 3 different planting zones. The first planting zone here in that 0 to 30 feet from the ordinary high water mark, we planted it at a high density, about 5 to 7 foot off-center spacings. This is really for water quality to capture sediment, stabilize this eroding stream bank here, particularly towards the upstream part of the project. And really this would interact with high flows on a near annual or on a 2-year basis. Further back in the 30 foot to a maximum of 150 feet from the ordinary high water mark, this is focused more on shade and reducing temperature input or thermal inputs. So we would be looking at planting cottonwoods at 10 to 12 foot spacing, 10 to 12 foot centers. Again, focused on shade, long-term shade, and largely debris. And then finally, this little buffer strip would be around this. I don't know if I can use the pointer, but the purple hatched area there.
Just have to press it really hard.
Towards the thing.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, well, yeah, so that area there is along a horse paddock. There's horses using the field now, and this project would set back that paddock a little bit and install a buffer strip that would help filter whatever runoff would come off of that out of that field. So our proposal covers all aspects of implementation, from planning and permitting to implementation, to site prep to implementation and site maintenance. Before any ground disturbing work is done, we are going to acquire all of our permits and go through the cultural resources process. While we're doing that in years 1 and 2, we'd also be preparing the field for planting. This is a picture of the field in September. It's fairly weed free. The portion of the field that is in production currently, the edges have broadleaf weeds that we'd be treating, along with mowing and keeping the Timothy field as weed free as we can make it. In year 2, in the fall of year 2, we would look at installing plants. We're looking at mechanical deep planting, but we have also considered augering those plants in as well. A couple of different ways to do it. And finally, we'd be looking to do site maintenance for 2 years. Kat, I know, touched on sort of the benefits of site maintenance and protecting the investment that we're putting into the site. So I'm not going to dive a whole lot into those details and instead go through some of our decision points and why we made the decisions for this project that we did. The first is for plant establishment. So plants at this site in the summertime, we expect groundwater levels to be about 4 to 6 feet deep, which is fairly deep for a riparian site that's right next to the stream. So if we were going to conventionally plant this, we would hand plant in the fall, install irrigation and water for 2 or 3 years until those plants reached that groundwater, right? Due to concerns about irrigation availability, the landowners or junior water rights holders, we believe that there's a significant amount of risk in relying on their irrigation right in order to water our planting, which is part of why we went with deep planting. Deep planting doesn't need any supplemental irrigation and would reduce that risk over the long term. Also, weeds are a concern. We are choosing to spot herbicide spray and mow before implementation to help create as good of planting conditions as possible. After disturbing the soil in year 2 with planting, going back through and providing 2 years of follow-up weed management. Broadleaves are our largest source of competition. We've seen this at several different reforestation sites and have plans to spot treat after implementation. We'll also be installing mulch to the plants that are outside of the Timothy field, as those plants, again, will have more weed competition than the plants within the Timothy field. The plants within the current Timothy field will be mowed, but won't be killed prior to or after implementation. We've used this method at a couple of our planting sites to help reduce broadleaf weeds and have seen great success with it. But a significant portion of our upkeep will be keeping that Timothy field mowed. And then herbivory. If you've driven through the Teanaway in fall or the winter, you'll see elk and deer. We expected this site in particular for herbivory to be low and for impact to be low. It's set back a little bit away from all of the major agricultural fields. There's still agricultural fields that elk and deer will visit. But we we're expecting that herbivory to be low. If we start seeing some significant herbivory associated with that, we'll be looking at installing some sort of protection fence or structure at that point. That would be in the fall of year 2 or 2027 or 2028. Here's a quick breakdown of our total ask is, I think it's 206,000. And I've kind of breezed through the presentation and forgot to mention, the landowners are really excited about this project and have a vested interest in it, especially in that eroding stream bank. So they have agreed to cost share the movement of that horse paddock fence, that post and rail fence, along with mowing their Timothy field for site prep before we put plants in the ground. This saves us a not insignificant amount of money. It's about $7,500. And yeah, they're very motivated to see this project to completion. Permitting and site prep will be our big costs in the first year, with planting our big costs in the second. And then again, follow up weed management and site maintenance in years 3 and 4, in 28 and 29. I think that's all I had. This site is a pretty cut and dry riparian planting project, in my mind at least. You know, there's some significant challenges at the site with being set up above the Teanaway River and Teanaway, low summer flows in the Teanaway in summer. But we think that we can mitigate those challenges with deep planning in particular and weed management. And with that, I can take any questions.
I can't stop myself, so I just wanted to add a couple of important things about the
Please.
project. Yeah, and thanks, Steven, really, really nice job. So one of the other, so this is on the main stem Teanaway, which is a highly developed area. It's kind of rural residential, and Mid-Columbia Fisheries has been working with partners to identify project riparian restoration areas to start to convert some of these banks that look like this, where there's no setback from agriculture. And we're really excited that these folks have been residents for over 10 or 15 years and are connected to the local community. So we're also looking at this project as a project that their neighbors will see and start to understand what riparian restoration does and means. And we're seeing that same thing happen on a local landowner down in the lower river, where his neighbors are seeing the work happening and approaching restoration professionals when they're on site and wondering what's going on. You know, can you come look at my property and evaluate if it would be valuable to you, kind of thing. So we're really, I just wanted to put that out there too, and that's all I'll say about that, but it has good value outside of the direct fish benefit.
Are the cottonwoods just beyond the Timothy field what you're trying to replicate?
Yeah, over the long term, I mean, those cottonwoods are probably,
Introduce?
I was gonna say at least 70 years old, probably. But yeah, so this site does include protecting that little area. That would be that picture was taken about midway through the site. Those are those cottonwoods down in the very bottom there. Yeah, we're seeking to expand that area.
Steven, I got a question more long-term with, like someday, you know, the ownership will change. Is there any need or concern about like I'll call conservation easement, you know, like say somebody comes in 100 years and says, oh, I want to make it Timothy again and mow it all down.
Yeah, we haven't directly discussed conservation easement with the landowners. All of our planting projects have 10-year landowner agreements after we leave the site. So that would be 2039 if all goes as planned, when we would leave 10 years after we would leave the site. We've worked with with other landowners on conservation easements. We're in talks about conservation easements with that landowner in the Lower River. But for this property in particular, we haven't approached that with the landowners yet. Yeah.
Is that agreement transferable?
Yeah.
So it becomes an encumbrance on the title?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just add that several years ago, these landowners approached me wanting to do rock armor along this bank, so this is awesome to see. I told them no. I
They
was,
went away.
I was curious if any of their water right will become available to the river with the transition to cottonwoods.
That's-
Timothy, if you've
That's a-
considered any of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we've talked internally about. We haven't approached them about that yet. The Timothy production is important to them because they have horses. If we were gonna take, it's about 2 acres out of production. I think that they'd be open to hearing the idea. I don't know, they're pretty. They're really focused on their stream bank and restoring that. I wonder if we haven't talked with them about that, but I wonder if they'd be open to that.
What if the real advantage is that if they don't do something about their right and it's clear after 5 years, you haven't sprayed, you haven't irrigated in the buffer, they're at risk of relinquishment. So it's probably really strategic to them to take at least the piece just in your buffer and do even just a temporary in-stream lease, even if it's a no cash transaction.
I'm looking at it a little bit differently. In the beginning, you said it was a junior water right. So now we've got a field that doesn't get irrigated on a low flow. It's kind of dry. All of a sudden, you're putting 120 wells that are pumping water to feed that tree. Who's getting the water right to put water in that tree that's not being used now? I see this being a negative on the amount of water in the river. Those trees suck a lot of water. When it's 89, 90 degrees, they suck a lot of water.
Right.
So where's that water right come from?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to riparian areas in the, a lot of documented benefit about how they hold water on the landscape longer and yeah, I mean, I do think that those trees provide a certain amount of
Figure out how many gallons a day transpiration goes in. The creek I live on. Go down there when it's 80 degrees, come back a week later when it's 104. And see the creek is dry. Where's that water going? All the trees are sucking it up.
In a case like this, where you're going from irrigated to cottonwood, the acre feet per acre of the Timothy field and cottonwoods are pretty close, so it's probably not a lot of net change.
Well, we got a junior water right, so they get shut off. The tree's gonna keep growing. You can't shut the tree out.
And in Washington, no one has pursued riparian vegetation as the riparian on downstream rights. Colorado, there's attempts to do that. Yeah.
They just haven't thought of it.
Yeah, if you've ever worked on cottonwoods in Arizona where the creeks go dry at night, during the day and come back at night, it's crazy.
Oh, it's wild.
I think
Has anyone looked at the channel morphology to see if the channel is just simply migrating?
this, you're talking about this
Yeah,
as it migrates away from.
no, yeah, I mean, yeah, you gotta go upstream farther, obviously, than what the picture shows. But is there something happening upstream that's, a river just being a river and wanting to move its channel? And this individual happens to be the recipient of the cutting of that new channel?
Yeah, I think that there is some of that. I mean, rivers migrate, right? I think where this is a little bit different cases, if there's that infrastructure downstream of that, of the river moving. And eventually that bank will probably fall into the river, right? Our goal is not to stop that from happening. Our goal is to slow that from happening. Kat, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say exactly what you just said. So we're not trying to, and that was a great question. Thank you. Leroy, but the issue is not to stop migration, it's to slow it down. So when there's no woody vegetation on a bank, banks erode very rapidly. So we want, if migration is gonna happen, we want erosion and aggregation elsewhere. And you can actually see that some of that aggregation is happening in that little bar that's starting to develop just downstream, right? But we just don't want it to move as fast as it's moving right now. And that's true, not just here, but like on any fair, like denuded agricultural bank. The other piece that we didn't really highlight is that this is like, there's Timothy agriculture and there's also that horse paddock. And so this is really gonna perform an important water quality benefit of creating a buffer that captures sediment and basically is a kind of a first line of defense before water coming off of that field or off of that paddock hits the river, right? So there's just there's also a basic water quality.
You have questions, sir?
I think that there's a historical element here that has been mentioned. One of the reasons why they stopped the logging flows that they did on the Teanaway is because it was wiping the banks completely out. So they used to put dams on the Teanaway and they would flood it all that wood down the Yakima from there. And that was one of the comments, historical comments where people downstream with property like that was that every year that flood, artificial flood just would be taking out so huge amounts of little things in the fields. So it's a process that's been going on and was accelerated, immensely a long time ago. And so this just sort of is almost like a Band-Aid on something that got tore up a long time ago.
When was the last time you pulled the bombs out? Ages?
Oh, no, it's probably longer than that. The flood, when they used to put the dam.
Oh, is it late 20s, 30s?
Yeah, a lot longer than that. Then they moved to the.
Sorry, this is Becca. They ended the log drives in 1916.
Thanks for setting the record straight. Mark commented he was glad to hear that the landowners are excited about the project. Davey wanted to recommend adding Pacific lamprey to your fish list as the Unisem Teanaway is an active adult translocation stream and they find larval lamprey during their surveys each year.
I didn't know that. It's good to hear.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I can't let this go, but the topic of the trees using water, yes, they've used water. I've encountered a number of times that same argument in two ways. One is folks who have vegetation along canals wanting to cut that vegetation out and get credit for that water. And I've seen it in terms of, the notion that trees use water, so let's cut down the trees, we'll have more water in stream. Ecologically, we have to look at this holistically. Yeah, trees are gonna use water. Ecologically, it's better for the Teanaway River to have trees along it than to not. So anyway, I just had to say that.
And I had a similar point on that. This is like the perfect dichotomy of that. Upper area burn gives the water for the low areas trees to take. So you get a little bit of additional loss of trees that we saw in the presentation earlier of losing a bunch of trees. That's where we'd gain those trees back lower down.
It also seems like when you have root masses and the soil there that there's this issue of it, the ground is absorbing and holding more water. Because it doesn't just.
They hold the ground.
It just roar.
They hold the ground a lot better until it falls over.
Yeah.
I mean, ET is really real. You can calculate it. If you work with a hydrologist, you can get a sense of when does it add up enough that it really affects local in-stream flows, or is it a level that's more than rounding dust on a waterway? There are times it is, but most places not. When you could run the calcs here, and I was running real rough into my head, it's pretty darn small. Where you do see it, the biggest issue is Colorado. You do have a lot of irrigation rights downstream of multi-hundred acre beaver meadow restoration projects, where if you imagine big flat valleys that can spread water on the whole thing, you can really reduce flows. You can also enhance them if you drive in the groundwater at the right time and store them. There's no single rule, but it is real and it's all calculable and it's not.
Good to get this discussion started today. We'll surely continue it into the evaluation process. For now, we're into lunchtime. Want to take this moment to thank Steven, Kat, Carson, being on hand, Becca, for this mid-sea morning that we've had.
Well, it's a marathon on their part. I thought they did a great job, really.
Yeah.